Hello and welcome to this video, guys. Today we're going to walk through custom hooks in React. I'm using a Next.js application, that's why I have Next.js syntax here. So let's get started. A custom hook in React can be created in multiple ways, but one way we could do it now, just to simplify it for ourselves, is that we could just export a function. So let's not export something default, so use isMobile. We could also remove the export as we have it in the same file right now. So we're going to create a custom hook that essentially checks whether we are on mobile devices or not. So we also want to take in something, say the breakpoint for mobile devices. Can default this to 768 pixels in this case. The first you want to do is we want to create a state where we have a true or false value for the mobile. So we need to toggle this value based on the width of the actual browser that we're running it on. So we create the variable first, then we want to have a use effect. So once it has been mounted, and then we want to do a couple of things. So we can say, all right, so we could create a function here called handle resize. Actually, let's create it inside here instead. So handle resize, we can set isMobile. Here we can say window.innerWidth is less than breakpoint. And not breakpoints, let's just remove this real quick. We can call it mobile breakpoint to make it even more intuitive. Alright, so we have the handle resize function now, which is just going to check the size and then return it. And we could also now just create a debounce resource for that if you wanted to, but we're not going to do this in this particular case. So what we're going to do here is we're going to essentially, first and foremost, when we mount the component, we want to determine whether is this a mobile or not. So the first thing we want to do once the component has been mounted, we want to trigger this event. So it's going to check whether the window inner width is less than the breakpoint that we're passing in. If it is, then we have a mobile device. If not, then it's going to be a desktop device. All right, so that's the first thing we do. Then we also need to add the event listener. So on resize, so when the user resizes the screen, we want the UI to reflect based on that. So we can add the event listener in this way, and here we're going to call the resize. So when the window is resizing, we want to trigger this handle resize function. And then what we can do is we can make sure that we actually remove our event listener here as well. So we can say remove event listener in this way. So it will set up an event listener. It will initially trigger the handle resize. It will make sure that whenever we resize the screen, it will also call this function to reset the variable that we have. And once the component is unmounted, it will trigger this return here, which essentially will remove the event listener that we have to make sure that we don't lose any memory usage and so on. So the last thing we want to do is returning isMobile. All right, so once we have this up and running, we are pretty much set to go. And here it's going to complain a bit that it wants the mobile breakpoint here. So whenever the mobile breakpoint changes, we want to re-trigger this, which makes sense in this case. So how do I use this hook now? You can just copy the name of the function here, and hence it's just a function which contains this content, and it then returns a value here. I could return whatever I want to return here. It could be an object with multiple values. It could be an object with callback functions or and so on. So keep in mind that this is one way of actually keeping the components that you have very clean. So instead of having this boilerplate code within my home page, I can create a hook, a custom hook in this case, that would serve this purpose. But does it make sense to do it for smaller feature? I would say no. If you know that you're going to reuse something amongst the whole application, it makes total sense to create the custom hook. So in this case, we are going to use this mobile in multiple places, which eventually made us create it in this way. So last thing we want to do is essentially exactly like we do with use effect and so on. We're going to say isMobile equals to use isMobile, right? So now we can utilize this variable here to determine whether we are on mobile devices or not. So we could say isMobile, yes, mobile, no desktop. So if we would now put the browser next to this screen, we could eventually see that. So now that we have them side by side, it might be easier for us to preview it. Let's just add an H tag so that the text becomes a bit bigger. And as you can see now, yeah, might make sense to wrap it as well so that we actually get the H1. So in this case, it is on desktop. If I resize the screen, it turns into mobile. And when and as you can see here, it switches when it hits the breakpoint in this case. So in this way, you can create custom hooks which are reusable for your whole application, and it's quite trivial. And obviously, you're not going to have the hooks within the components or pages that we have in this way, so you would most likely create a map, a shared map. So shared, within the shared, you would have a folder called hooks, and within the hooks, you would have a use is mobile tsx. All right, and here you would just export default and then the function, and we can just make sure that we import the use state and use effect here, and make sure that we just call it from the home page that we want, right? So now we have essentially cleaned up a lot of code from here. It's quite simple, just calling it the hook in this way. We could also make sure that we send another number here. As you saw, we could determine here by actually setting a default value. The default value was 768. If we wanted to override that, we could. So this is one way of actually working with hooks, custom hooks, to simplify your lives as a developer. Thank you for watching, guys. All of the best. Bye.